The plan check process is arguably the most important part of any project because it's where we get the actual permits to build a home. Legal permission to start construction. It's not really a sexy phase, but if we can't get permits, we can't build. So it's sort of critical, but it's also pretty daunting for a lot of people because you're dealing with government officials, building codes, public hearings, lots of fees, just a lot of red tape. It's lovely. I feel that this is one of the big reasons that a client wants to hire an architect to begin with, not just to get the pretty renderings of what the home will look like, but to actually take them through the process and get a permit to allow them to build that rendering. My whole design process is tooled to make this as streamlined as possible. So let's break down what this looks like in practice, how permitting works, and how I try to make it as quick a phase as possible. If you're following along in this series, we left off at the end of the construction documentation phase, and the deliverable was a fully engineered construction document plan set reflecting the design. This permitting phase that we're shifting into is what we start to do with that construction document set. And there are two main paths that we start to go down with that set. The first path is the initial submittal to the local jurisdiction in order to get our building permits. The details of this process will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but the general concept is this. We print out multiple sets of the plans. We take those plans to the city and hand them over the counter to the reviewers along with an application and some fees. And that's it for now. We sit and wait to hear once they've finished reviewing the plans and have corrections for us, which might take 2 to 4 weeks to hear back. But little insight on what happens behind the scenes on the reviewer side. They take those plans and they distribute them to a handful of different internal departments. Each one of those departments is responsible for reviewing a different aspect of the design. Common ones include a planning department, which is responsible for verifying the design is within the setbacks and building heights, a public works department that might review items impacting public infrastructure such as sidewalks and sewer drains, a building department that will review the structural calculations to verify the columns and beams are all to code and that all of our life safety requirements are met. Depending on the jurisdiction, there might be mechanical systems review, fire department reviews, transportation department reviews. It can sort of go on and it can be a lot, which all circles back to a point that I brought up back in the design development video a while back. All of these departments typically have people available to review and answer questions before this whole formal submittal. So what I like to do is reach out to these departments back during that design development phase before we've finalized all the engineering and printed out our physical copies in order to do an informal review and get their major feedback early in the process. It's a great way to make this whole process smoother because of what happens next. After all the departments have reviewed, they compile all their comments into a big single document, call me up and tell me to come pick up the plans for corrections. And now it's a game of responding to all of those corrections. So quick little pause to set expectations. They virtually never approve the plans on the first go. Occasionally, I'll get a single department that might approve the plans right away, but it's very rare. Even on my best and cleanest plans, there's almost always something incredibly minor that a plan checker is going to question and call out. One of my biggest tricks to minimize those comments is to get a hold of the plan checker's reviewing checklist. They don't have all of their comments memorized. They're typically provided a checklist from the city listing all the items they need to verify are in the set. If I can get a hold of that list before we submit, I can draft a letter going through point by point explaining where they can find the relevant info in my plans addressing their checklist items. And that's a great way to cut down on the number of comments we get. But they still tend to go rogue, and it's always a bit of surprise on what corrections they're going to hone in on and focus on. Again, this will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdictions. Some are harder than others, and some are non-existent. It really depends. I digress. After we've received our corrections, it's time to address them. Typically that means I fix whatever needs fixing in the design, verifying that change with the client if needed. Once I have the reapproval from the client, I distribute the comments and the revised design package out to the consultants who I'll fix and revise their sheets for new construction document submittal. Ideally, this takes around 2 weeks to turn around to have a new package of plans ready to resubmit to the city. Once we do, it's the same process as the first check. Print out the plans, deliver them back to the city where they review them again, seeing whether we picked up all their corrections. The second check is generally where we start to get multiple departments approving things. If anyone didn't approve at this point, it's typically going to require a face-to-face meeting with the actual plan checker to discuss why the approval hasn't come and what they're looking for. The process goes back and forth until we have all department approvals. Simple projects might get approvals within 2 or 3 rounds. Complicated ones might take 3 or 4. It all depends on the project and the savviness of the people reviewing. And once we get all those department approvals, then you can pull your building permit and start construction. Again, depending on the jurisdiction and complexity of the project, that whole back and forth process can take anywhere from 3 to 5 months. But we're not just sitting idly by while the plans are being reviewed. The second path, we start with that initial construction document set. It's the perfect set to have your potential builders review and provide bids on the project. It's the first set that has full architectural drawings along with all the structural engineering needed to put a cost together. The process of reviewing bids is, on a high level, pretty simple. We distribute the plans to 2 to 3 qualified builders. They all look at the same plans, and each puts together a cost for the project. Based on interviews, tours of past work, their pricing structure, the clients are able to make an informed decision on who they want to build their home. So this whole process of selecting the builder can happen in parallel during the city plan check process. Perfect timing would be such that the client picks their builder by the time the city grants approval, so that the builder can grab the building permit the moment we get our approvals and hit the ground running out in the field. In some ways, the plan check process feels a bit slow on the client side because they're really just waiting around for permission to get started. And yeah, it sort of is a slow phase. Beyond a handful of tricks we have to reduce the number of corrections, we're largely at the mercy of the reviewing jurisdiction for a while. I will say there are areas of the country that don't require building permits for homes, like rural Montana. So if you really want to avoid this phase, go buy land out there. For the rest of us in civilization, you're probably going to have some version of a process like this in order to get your permits. But once you do, the fun stuff starts out in the field. And I'll dive into that final phase, construction administration, in another video. Till then, it'd be lovely if you could hit subscribe and like if you've learned anything useful. Thanks, and talk soon.